Subscribe to Keep It Terrifying for creepy tales, horror, and nightmares you won't forget. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and keep it terrifying.
Part 1, The Invitation. Ray had never been one for extravagant parties or mysterious invitations. Yet, when the ornate envelope arrived at his doorstep, his curiosity got the better of him. There was something about the elegant, almost archaic handwriting on the card that pulled him in. It read, "A feast awaits you. Come to the Manor of Eldergrove, where darkness meets indulgence. Midnight sharp. Come alone." The words lingered in his mind, swirling like an eerie melody. He knew nothing about the Manor of Eldergrove, he'd never heard of it, never seen it on any map, but there was an undeniable pull. And that pull, for reasons unknown, compelled him to RSVP. The night was crisp as he drove down a winding, isolated road, the headlights barely cutting through the heavy fog. His thoughts bounced between skepticism and excitement. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? A secret society? A twisted experiment? He didn't know, but he had to know. After what seemed like hours of driving, the road ended at a towering iron gate, adorned with intricate designs that seemed almost unnatural. There was no signage, no name, just an ominous presence. He stopped the car, took a deep breath, and approached the gate, where a dark figure stood waiting. The figure, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, gave a slow, deliberate nod when Ray stepped forward. No words were exchanged, instead, the gate creaked open by itself. The chill in the air deepened, and Ray felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Despite his hesitation, something compelled him to walk through. The path beyond was lined with ancient trees, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. The scent of damp earth and decay hung heavy in the air. As he walked toward the mansion, the grand, shadowed structure loomed in front of him like a dark sentinel, its windows glowing with an unsettling yellow light. When he reached the door, it opened silently, almost as though it had been waiting for him. Inside, a grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals flickering dimly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The hallway was lined with portraits of old, serious-looking figures, their eyes following him as he moved forward. A voice, smooth and deep, echoed from somewhere behind him. "Ray, welcome. We've been expecting you." Ray turned, startled, but saw no one. A chill ran down his spine. Who said that?" The voice came again, this time closer. "Come, the feast is ready." Ray was about to question everything, but something in his gut told him it was too late to turn back. His feet moved of their own accord, carried forward by the eerie yet compelling atmosphere. The dining room was like something out of a nightmare. A long, dark table stretched down the center, laden with grotesque platters of food. Steam rose from the dishes, but none of the smells seemed to make sense, sweet, rancid, savory, all at once. The guests were already seated, but their faces were obscured by shadow or hooded cloaks. He was directed to an empty seat at the far end of the table. As he sat, a tall, thin figure stepped forward, an older man with pale skin and dark, penetrating eyes. "We have been waiting for you, Ray. Your place is set." Ray opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. His mind raced. There was something wrong. Something about the way they all stared at him, as if they knew him, as if they were waiting for him to realize something he hadn't yet. The old man motioned toward the head of the table, where a single, massive plate lay. The centerpiece of the feast. "Dig in," the man urged, his voice low but somehow comforting, like the promise of an old secret. Ray glanced at the plate and felt his stomach churn. It was a grotesque display, some kind of meat, charred and glistening with an oily sheen. But it wasn't the appearance of the food that unsettled him, it was the strange, hollow silence that enveloped the room. The guests didn't move, didn't speak. It was as though time had stopped. The food on his plate seemed to shift, as if it were alive. The surface quivered slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if something beneath it was trying to break free. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the dish. "Go on," the man's voice broke through his trance. "We all feast together." Ray reached for the utensils, his hands trembling. The motion felt mechanical, as if he were no longer in control of his own body. His fingers closed around the fork and knife, and he stabbed into the meat. The moment the fork touched the flesh, a voice whispered in his ear. "You shouldn't have come, Ray." He froze, dropping the fork onto the plate with a loud clatter. His heart thudded in his chest as he turned toward the source of the whisper. But there was nothing. No one had moved, no one had spoken. "Ray?" the man asked, concern in his voice, but Ray could hear the undertones of something darker. "Is something wrong?" Suddenly, the room grew colder. The shadows around the table lengthened, stretching toward him. His breath caught in his throat as his gaze darted to the portraits on the walls. They were no longer just staring. Their eyes seemed to follow him, their mouths twisted into grimaces. Ray's stomach twisted in a knot as he tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move. The others remained seated, unmoving, their eyes locked on him, never blinking. "Eat, Ray," the old man repeated, this time with more insistence. "Eat, and you will understand." Ray's vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he saw the figures at the table shift, just a fraction, but enough to send a jolt of terror through him. His mind raced. He couldn't stay here. He had to leave. But the door, the way out, it was nowhere to be found. A low, guttural noise erupted from somewhere deep within the mansion. It sounded like something ancient and hungry, waking after a long slumber. Ray's hand trembled as he reached toward the food once more, his instincts screaming at him to run. But it was too late. Something was already stirring in the shadows. Part 2, The Hunger. Ray's fingers hovered above the dish, his mind spinning with confusion and dread. Every instinct screamed at him to get up, to leave, but his body refused to obey. The shadows in the room seemed to grow thicker, closer, as if the darkness itself was creeping toward him. "Ray," the old man's voice was sharp now, no longer gentle. "You must eat. You must feed the hunger." The words echoed in Ray's ears, repeating like a mantra. The guests remained perfectly still, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They watched him as though they were waiting for something, waiting for him to do something, to make the next move. The air grew thick with tension, and the low, guttural growl he had heard earlier reverberated through the walls, rattling his teeth. Without thinking, Ray grabbed the fork again. His hands trembled uncontrollably, but he couldn't stop himself. It was as if an invisible force was guiding his actions. His heart hammered in his chest, and yet, against his will, he plunged the fork into the dish. The moment the meat pierced, a strange sound echoed through the room, like a low, hissing whisper, like something trying to break free. The surface of the meat shuddered violently, and Ray recoiled, his stomach churning with a nausea he had never felt before. "You shouldn't have come," the whisper echoed again, louder this time. His breath hitched, and his vision swam. The meat on his plate was alive, writhing beneath the surface, the one solid form now seeming to pulse, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The aroma that had initially seemed inviting now turned rancid, suffocating him. He tried to push the plate away, but his body refused. He couldn't stop. He couldn't move. The guests remained silent, unmoving. Ray felt their eyes on him, their cold, dead gaze seeping into his very soul. "Eat," the old man commanded, his voice carrying an unnatural weight. "Only then will you know what we truly are." Ray's stomach rebelled against the very thought, but he found himself leaning forward, his mouth opening without his consent. The forkful of wriggling flesh neared his lips, and he felt a vile force pulling him closer to it. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound, like the crack of a whip. Ray froze. The shadows in the room shifted again, this time much more violently. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices, voices of anguish, pleading, calling. "Don't eat. Please, don't," they screamed, but the words were drowned out by something deeper, something ancient. It sounded like the very walls of the mansion were groaning in hunger. Ray tried to fight it. He willed himself to stand, to run, but his body was no longer his own. His hand jerked forward, the fork inching closer to his mouth, and just before it reached his lips, something inside him snapped. He screamed. A scream that echoed through every inch of his body, his soul, but it was as if the mansion swallowed it whole, leaving him in a void of silence. And then, just as his teeth were about to sink into the writhing flesh, everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze, the atmosphere thick with dread. From the far end of the table, a figure stood. The figure was tall, shrouded in a cloak that seemed to swallow the light. It was the same figure he had seen before, the one who had guided him into the feast. But now, something was different. It wasn't just a man. It wasn't even human. Ray's breath caught in his throat as the figure raised its hood. Underneath was not a face, but a smooth, pale surface, with no eyes, no mouth, just a featureless, blank expanse of skin that seemed to ripple and twist. Enough, the figure said in a voice that made Ray's skin crawl. It wasn't a voice, at least, not in the way he understood it. It was as though the words were not coming from the figure, but from everywhere at once. From the walls, the air, from the very ground beneath him. The guests at the table rose in unison, their movements jerky and unnatural. One by one, they removed their hoods, revealing faces that were twisted beyond recognition, half human, half something else entirely. Their skin was mottled and pale, their eyes sunken and black as coal, but there was something in those eyes. A hunger. "You've come to feast," the figure continued, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "But it is not food you seek. You've come for the same thing we all do. The same thing we've always craved." Ray's heart slammed against his chest as the truth crashed into him. The feast wasn't just a meal. It wasn't just about food, it was about something far worse. The hunger in the room wasn't for food at all. It was for souls. The figure stepped forward, and Ray felt an unnatural pull toward it. He staggered backward, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend the full scope of the nightmare he was trapped in. "Ray," the figure said again, its voice impossibly close now. "You've been chosen, just like all the others before you. You will feed the hunger. We all do. It's the price of existence here. To feed the hunger. To become part of it." The guests started to move again, closing in on him. Their movements were inhuman, like marionettes being pulled by unseen strings. And then, one by one, they reached for him. Ray's body froze, his heart racing as their fingers grazed his skin. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt like the very walls of the manor were closing in around him, suffocating him, drawing him into the darkness. The hunger, it was everywhere. In the distance, the hissing whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Come. Come join us." Ray felt his legs give way beneath him, and he sank to the floor, the weight of the situation crushing him. His mind screamed for him to wake up, to escape, but nothing would free him. Nothing could. As the last of his strength drained away, he felt his body being dragged closer to the feast, closer to the table, where the writhing mass of meat awaited him. The old man's voice filled his ears once more, cold and final. "You will eat. You will become one with us." Part 3, The Feast. Ray's body refused to move. It was as though his mind had detached, unable to break free from the suffocating grasp of the mansion. The air grew thick with a damp, oppressive heat, like being trapped in the belly of some ancient creature, waiting to be consumed. The guests, those twisted, half-human figures, began to close in, their cold fingers brushing his skin, each touch sending a shock of icy terror through him. Their breath was fetid, a mixture of decay and something far worse. Their eyes, black and endless, locked onto him, drawing him deeper into the nightmare. The old man, now standing at the head of the table, was no longer just a man. His skin seemed to peel and shift, stretching in unnatural ways, revealing glimpses of something far more sinister beneath. His eyes burned with an unsettling hunger, gleaming like dark pools of void. Ray's body jerked involuntarily as they dragged him toward the table. The writhing meat on the plate seemed to react to his approach, its surface shuddering in anticipation. As his hands were forced onto the table, he felt the cold, slick texture of the plate beneath him. He tried to pull away, but the hands that gripped him were relentless. "Eat," the old man said again, his voice low and commanding, resonating in Ray's bones. "Join us. Join the feast. It is the only way." Ray's heart pounded. His body screamed to run, but it felt like a dream, like he was trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. The voices, the whispers, they were everywhere now. He could feel them clawing at the edges of his mind, pushing him closer and closer to the edge of madness. "Ray," the voice of the cloaked figure rasped. "You are the next. You will be the next to fill the hunger." The words echoed in his mind, spiraling around him, each syllable sinking deeper into his skull. The hunger, it was real. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was something alive, something ancient that had been waiting for him, for someone like him. The air grew heavier, suffocating him. He felt his pulse racing in his ears, drowning out the whispers. And yet, somehow, he could still hear them, feel them. It was as though the very walls of the mansion had become a living thing, watching him, waiting. It wasn't just his body that they wanted. They wanted something far more precious. His essence. His soul. The old man leaned closer, his face now barely inches from Ray's, and Ray could feel a cold, clammy breath on his skin. The figure's lips didn't move, but somehow, he could hear the words in his mind. "The feast will never end. We are all bound to it." Suddenly, there was a sharp crack, like the sound of breaking bones, and Ray's chest seized in agony. His breath caught in his throat. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, sharp, biting, as though his insides were being pulled apart. The table beneath him trembled, and the writhing mass of flesh on his plate seemed to pulse with life. The other guests began to chant in a low, guttural voice, a chant that seemed to reverberate through his very soul. Each word felt like a lash against his skin, each syllable dragging him deeper into the void. "We feast. We feast. We feast," they repeated in unison, their voices merging into a single, all-consuming sound. Ray could feel it now, the hunger. It wasn't just in the air or in the food, it was in him, in his very blood. It clawed at him from the inside, gnawing at his bones, consuming his thoughts. It whispered to him, coaxing him, begging him to give in. His mind fought back, scrambling for any sense of reality, but it was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The walls of the room began to distort, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. The portraits on the walls, those lifeless eyes, began to move, their figures shifting, their mouths forming silent screams. The once distant growl he had heard earlier now sounded like it was coming from inside his skull, reverberating through the very marrow of his bones. Then, the old man's voice returned, this time louder, clearer. "You will feed it, Ray. You are one of us now." With that, the plate of meat quivered again, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The once solid mass began to shift, like something was pushing from underneath, forcing its way to the surface. And then, from within the meat, a grotesque face began to form. It was a face that seemed to recognize him, twisted, pale, and gaunt, with hollow eyes that stared deep into his soul. Ray's body lurched as if pulled by some invisible force. His mouth opened, but not of his own volition. His teeth clenched, and before he could stop it, he felt himself take a bite. The taste was indescribable. It wasn't like any food he had ever encountered. It wasn't savory or sweet, it was wrong. It tasted of rot, of decay, of something ancient and unnatural. It filled his mouth, flooding every part of him with a sensation of suffocating, unbearable hunger. And in that moment, as the first bite slid down his throat, Ray realized the truth. He wasn't eating just food. He was eating them, the souls of those who had come before him, who had sat at this table, fed the hunger, and become part of it. He could feel them now, swirling in his chest, filling his body, his mind. Their anguish, their pain, they were inside him, becoming part of him, and in return, he was feeding the hunger, keeping it alive. The figure in the cloak stepped forward, its featureless face now inches from his own. The air grew thick with the weight of its presence, suffocating him. You will never escape, Ray. The hunger is eternal. And now, you are ours. The others at the table began to rise, their hands outstretched toward him, their black eyes glinting with that same unquenchable thirst. The old man, no, the thing that had once been a man, smiled, revealing rows of jagged, inhuman teeth. Ray tried to scream, but the sound was lost, swallowed by the hunger. His body was no longer his own, his mind slipping further into the void. The table stretched endlessly before him, a never-ending banquet of suffering and consumption. He was part of it now, part of the endless cycle of feeding, of becoming one with the feast. The darkness closed in around him, suffocating him as the other guests surrounded him, their mouths open wide, their hands pulling him deeper into the abyss. And then, all was silent. Part 4, The Hunger Reborn. Ray's vision swam. The dark, oppressive air of the manor pressed in on him from every direction, suffocating him, filling his lungs with a choking heaviness. His head spun, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if he were dreaming. Perhaps all of this was some twisted nightmare. But the pain in his chest, the gnawing emptiness, the hunger, told him otherwise. He tried to scream again, but his voice was lost, swallowed whole by the oppressive silence of the feast. The faces around him had blurred, their monstrous features flickering in and out of his vision like images from a broken mirror. The guests were circling him, their eyes hungry, ravenous, but not for food, not for meat. They were hungry for something far more sinister. Ray felt their fingers, cold, skeletal, yet impossibly strong, wrap around him, pulling him toward the center of the table. He could barely keep his eyes open as his head lolled to one side, his consciousness fraying at the edges. The faces of those seated around him distorted, shifting like shadows, too terrible to look at for long. The old man, no, the thing that had been the old man, stood above him now, towering with a twisted, alien grace. His voice was a low, guttural hum, vibrating in Ray's chest like the resonance of some ancient, forgotten ritual. You see now, Ray. You understand. The words dripped with malice, crawling beneath Ray's skin, making his blood run cold. He tried to look away, but the hunger had taken root in him. It had settled deep within him, gnawing at his insides, whispering promises of power, of eternal life, of belonging. But there was no power here. No escape. Only consumption. Ray felt himself shudder as the thing that had been the old man leaned in, its breath putrid and sharp, like the scent of rotting earth. The air around him thickened, as though time itself was bending and breaking under the weight of the hunger. You have been chosen, the creature said, its voice now sounding like 1,000 voices layered together, the words twisted with unearthly distortion. Chosen to join the feast. Chosen to feed the hunger. A chill ran through Ray's bones as the words sunk in, each one a heavy, unrelenting hammer blow. He tried to move, to break free, but his body had become numb. He felt as though his very soul were being drawn out of him, fed into the twisted banquet before him. The hunger was not just in the air or the food, it was a living entity. A being that had existed long before Ray had even taken his first breath, a creature that thrived on the souls of the damned. And now, it had claimed him. It had made him one of its own. The guests at the table leaned closer, their hollow eyes filled with a vile, insatiable desire. One by one, they reached out and touched him, their fingers ice-cold, but their grip unyielding. No, Ray managed to whisper, his voice hoarse. No, please. I don't want this. But the words fell on deaf ears. The feast had already begun, and the hunger would not be denied. As the others began to chant once more, low, guttural, endless, the very walls of the manor seemed to shift, twisting and groaning under the weight of the ritual. The chandelier above him flickered and swayed, its crystals shimmering with an unnatural light, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. Ray could feel it now, something moving inside of him. Something foreign. Something ancient. The first bite had been the beginning. Now, it was spreading, crawling through his veins, through his mind. It was turning him into one of them. "You will not leave this place," the figure said. "No one ever does." The truth hit him like a crushing wave. He was trapped. He wasn't the first. And he wouldn't be the last. Others had come before him, just as he had. And they, too, had fed the hunger. They, too, had become part of it. The faces around him grew clearer, sharper. He saw them now, saw the twisted, tortured expressions of those who had once been like him. Once, they had been human, but now they were something else. Something hollow. One of the guests leaned in close, and Ray could feel its icy breath against his skin. "We are the ones who never leave," it whispered, its voice as cold as the grave. "We are the hunger. And now, you are us." Ray felt his soul tear, like paper caught in the wind, scattering into the void. He was no longer his own. He was becoming part of the feast, part of the hunger that had devoured countless souls before him. And, like them, he would be here forever, his essence bound to this place, this manor, this endless night. The guests began to shift in their seats, their movements growing more frantic, more erratic. Their mouths opened, their eyes glowing with a sickening hunger. Ray wanted to scream again, but the words wouldn't come. He could feel his body beginning to change, his skin growing cold, his limbs stiffening. His heart, once full of fear and resistance, now beat to a different rhythm, slow, hollow, in tune with the ancient hunger that consumed all in its path. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him, and the shadows grew deeper, darker, as though they were reaching out to claim him fully. The hunger was a force beyond understanding. It was a living thing, no, not just a thing, but a presence that devoured, that lived off the souls of the foolish, the desperate, and the damned. And now, Ray was one of them. He was part of it, trapped in the endless cycle of consumption. There would be no escape. There never was. As the final part of him was consumed, Ray's consciousness shattered, scattered into the darkness, mingling with the souls of those who had come before him. He could feel them, feel their pain, their terror, their endless longing. And he understood now, the hunger would never end. Not for him. Not for anyone. And somewhere, in the deepest corners of the manor, he could still hear the voice of the old man echoing in his mind. "The feast is eternal."